In the Scotswood area of Newcastle upon Tyne, England, a little girl named Mary Flora Bell was born. On May 26, 1957, she was born to Betty Bell, a teen mother who worked as a prostitute, and possibly a career criminal named Billy Bell. Though no one is exactly sure who her father was, it was from Billy that Mary would get her name and whom she considered to be her father. Little Mary certainly didn't have a very auspicious beginning, her mother reportedly saying, "Get that thing away from me," upon first seeing her child. Scotswood was an impoverished area with most of the residents struggling to get by, and Mary's family was no different. Betty was reported to be a mentally unstable and abusive person who took much of her frustration out on little Mary. She would drop her off with relatives, only to take her back even though the relatives were willing to keep her. Once she tried to give Mary away to someone outside of an abortion clinic, but Betty's sister was able to get Mary back from the woman. Perhaps it would have been better to have let her go. Family members later said that Betty had tried to kill Mary several times by attempting to overdose her on pills, and once pushed her out of a window trying to make it look like an accident. It has also been speculated that Betty may have suffered from Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a mental condition where a parent or guardian intentionally hurts their dependent, making it look like an accident or disease in order to garner sympathy and attention for themselves. Another story was that at the age of 5, Mary had witnessed a friend be struck and killed by a bus. Mary undoubtedly witnessed some part of her mother's profession, but she later claimed that not only did she see her mother engaging in the act of prostitution, but that her mother had sold Mary herself to her clients starting at the age of 4 or 5. She also claimed that Betty had specialized in dominatrix-style encounters and often saw violence mixed with sex. As Mary got older and started going to school, she began acting out. She was known as a pretty, manipulative and intelligent girl prone to violent behavior and lying. She would bully other kids and often hurt those smaller than herself. She had one friend named Norma Bell, no relation, who was 2 years older, but being a bit simpler of mind, was led by Mary. Norma herself was known to solve disputes with her fists. On May the 11th, 1968, Mary, also known as May, and Norma were playing with a 3-year-old boy up on the top of an old air raid shelter, when he fell off and was badly injured. His parents assumed it had been an accident at the time. The very next day at school, Mary had grabbed 3 different girls by the throat and attempted to choke them. Police were called, but after a stern lecture, Mary was let off. On May the 25th, 1968, one day before her 11th birthday, Mary led 4-year-old Martin Brown to an abandoned house in an area where children often played. There she grabbed him by the throat and squeezed until he died. Since the young Mary didn't have the strength of an adult, there were no external marks left on Martin's throat, Mary left the house and went to see her friend Norma. About 15 minutes later, some boys discovered Martin's lifeless body and ran to tell some construction workers nearby. Mary had told Norma what she had done and brought her back to the house to show her the body. By then, adults were on the scene, and Mary had to content herself with telling Norma about the murder. After they were turned away from the crime scene, Mary ran to Martin's aunt and told her something had happened to him and led her back to the house. The adults, however, were in the dark about exactly what had happened. Since there were no visible marks on Martin's body and there was an empty bottle of pills nearby, it was assumed the child had overdosed, but officially the cause of death was left open. Mary began acting very strangely after the murder. The very next day she attempted to strangle Norma's younger sister, but was stopped by Norma's father and slapped across the face. The incident was not reported to police. She and Norma questioned Martin's family about how they felt and if they missed him, smiling the whole time. Mary even asked to see him, and on being reminded he was dead, she said,
"I know. I wanted to see him in his coffin."
Only a couple of days after the murder, Norma and Mary decided to break into a nursery nearby and cause a little trouble. After making a mess and destroying a few things, they wrote several notes to leave behind. The notes read, "I murder so that I may come back. Fuck off, we murder, watch out, Fanny and faggot. We did murder Martine Brown, fuck off you bastard. You are Mickey Y because we murdered Martin. Go Brown, you better look out, there are murders about. By Fanny and old faggot you screws." Police, still regarding Martin's death as accidental, dismissed the notes as a sick joke. The school installed an alarm system, and later that same week it went off. The police responded to find Mary and Norma hanging around next to the building. Both denied being responsible for the break-in, and they were released to their parents. Mary also declared on several occasions that she was the killer at school, but being known as a liar, she wasn't taken seriously. On July the 31st, Mary struck again. This time Norma was with her. They spotted 3-year-old Brian Howe playing outside with his dog Lassie and lured him to a vacant lot. There, one or both of them strangled the little boy and covered his body in grass and weeds. At some point, Mary returned to mutilate the boy's body. When Brian's family noticed he was missing, they started searching for him. Mary and Norma were quick to help. Mary even tried to direct Brian's sister to where the body was hidden behind some concrete blocks. Norma deflected the attempt by saying that Brian never went over there. Though many helped in the search, his body was not found until 11:10 that evening. Unlike Martin, Brian's cause of death was apparent from the beginning. Of the mutilations to his body, Inspector James Dobson said, "There was a terrible playfulness about it. A terrible gentleness, if you like, and somehow the playfulness of it made it more rather than less terrifying." After the medical examination was over, the inspector was told that the killer or killers were likely to be children. Mary and Norma were acting strangely again. The police started hearing stories about their past violent behaviour and Mary's boasts. As the investigation progressed, a witness came forward who said that they saw Mary with Brian on the day of the murder. Not only that, but they heard Mary telling Brian that he had a sore throat and she started to massage it, but didn't let go. Police also looked into Martin's death again and discovered that he too had been strangled. Clothing fibres from both Norma and Mary were found on Brian's body, but only fibres from Mary's clothing were found on Martin. Inspector Dobson watched the girl's behaviour at Brian's funeral. Mary Bell was standing in front of the Howes house when the coffin was brought out. I was, of course, watching her, and it was when I saw her there that I knew I did not dare risk another day. She stood there, laughing and rubbing her hands. I thought, my God, I've got to bring her in. She'll do another one. Both girls were arrested later that afternoon. Both Mary and Norma were interviewed multiple times, their stories constantly changing. Norma broke down first and told of how she watched Mary strangle little Brian. Mary accused Norma of lying and trying to get her into trouble and said it was Norma who killed Brian. Later, she even tried to say that she had seen an 8-year-old boy hit Brian on the day of the murder and had seen him playing with a broken pair of scissors. This proved to be a major mistake on Mary's part, since the fact that a pair of broken scissors were found at the scene and used in the mutilation was not released to the public. Also, the boy she accused had been at the airport at the time of the murder. Her demeanour during the interview certainly didn't help. She was calm, cold and detached. Not the typical behaviour of an 11-year-old child who has been hauled into a police station. The investigators described her as an unusually intelligent and manipulative child. In the end, both girls were charged with 2 counts of murder. On December the 5th of that year, the trial started at Newcastle Assizes. Each testified against the other, saying that they had witnessed the other murder Brian, but both claimed to have nothing to do with Martin's murder. Norma's behaviour during the trial was virtually opposite of Mary's. Where Norma cried, was overwhelmed and sought comfort from her parents, Mary sat stoic, detached and even traded quips with the lawyers on occasion. She did not look to her mother for comfort, though her mother certainly sought attention by wailing, crying and running out of the courtroom. After all the evidence from Martin's murder, the nursery break-in, Brian's murder and the girl's strange behaviour was presented, the verdicts were read out on December the 17th. Norma was acquitted of all charges. Most considered her to have been a bit slow-witted and led by Mary. Mary was acquitted of murder, mostly on account of her young age, but found guilty of 2 counts of manslaughter. When she heard the verdict, Mary cried for the first and last time during the trial. Testimony from psychiatrists labelled Mary with psychopathic tendencies, and the judge on the case considered her to be a very grave risk to other children if she is not closely watched. he sentenced her to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, effectively an indefinite sentence. She was sent to several different juvenile detention centres and prisons during her incarceration and was certainly not a model prisoner. She acted out, attacked other inmates and damaged furniture. She told some of her jailers early on,
"I like hurting little things that can't fight back."
In 1976 she was sent to an open prison for adults from which she escaped for 3 days before turning herself back in. During her time in prison, her mother had been taking advantage of her daughter's infamy by selling stories about Mary to the tabloids, as well as notes or poems supposedly written by her. Mary would later claim to have suffered sexual abuse while in prison, but only claimed to have lost her virginity during her 3-day escape, a direct contradiction to her claims of being prostituted out by her mother as a child. In 1980, Mary, aged 23 at the time, was released from prison and given a new identity. In an interview for a book being written about her, Mary told of her struggles to adapt to normal life. Having grown up behind bars, her new life was like nothing she had ever experienced, and she was terrified. She even said she committed petty crimes hoping to get herself arrested again so she could go back to the safety she felt in prison. The press discovered her new identity several times, and she was forced to move and start over again each time. On March 25, 1984, exactly 16 years to the day that she murdered Martin Brown, she gave birth to a baby girl. A debate took place on whether Mary should be allowed to keep the baby. The decision was made to let her keep the child and grant both Mary and the little girl anonymity until the child turned 18. The press tracked down their location again when the girl was 14, and she heard about her mother's past for the first time. In 1998, debate again swirled around the life of Mary Bell when it was discovered that she had been paid by an author to tell her story, effectively profiting from her crimes while still retaining her anonymity. This news prompted the families of the murdered children to speak up. They condemned the fact that she had made money from her crimes and demanded that it be given to charity. The families of the victims had been destroyed the day their children were murdered. Relationships were broken, some descended into alcoholism that took years to recover from. And yet Mary Bell not only was given a new life and had a child of her own, but was able to profit from their suffering, the suffering that she had caused. None of the victims' family members objected to the anonymity granted to Mary's daughter and held her in no way responsible for her mother's actions. But the fact that Mary had voluntarily brought attention back on herself and was getting paid to do it, and not only that, but had been given another new identity, had them wondering why a murderer's rights seemed to be of a higher priority than the victims or their families. More recently, in 2003, as Mary's daughter was nearing 18, Mary won a high court case to have her and her daughter's anonymity extended for life. This had raised yet more concerns about exactly what rights a murderer is entitled to. Now, when a person is granted lifelong anonymity by the court, it is often called a Mary Bell order. In 2009, it was reported that Mary had become a grandmother and the court order protecting Mary's identity and that of her daughter was extended to the grandchild as well. Today she is living out her life among the general populace with a new identity, courtesy of the British government. Well, my dear friends, thank you for watching as we conclude another vintage crime case. And this crime case is significant for me and my family because we actually lived not far from where Mary Bell lived. And although Mary Bell is somewhat older than I am, the actual area where she lived became my stomping ground as a teenager. I made a whole lot of friends there. It was a few miles, really only a couple of miles from where I lived. And I made a whole lot of friends down there, went there for many years. Yes, it was still as rough back then, but I say that once you know the people you're in, they'll look after you. You know, they don't like police, but once you're in with them, you're fine. Yes, it was a far cry from Australia. Beautiful sunshine, the beaches, coming to northern England, grey and dismal. We came over to see my relatives and ended up staying. At the start I hated it, but I got used to it, and when we first arrived there we bought an old vicarage, and then my parents separated and me and my mum went to live in high-rise flats, and I think it's around about the 2.5 minute mark. You see those high-rise flats, they're identical to what we lived in, and I loved it there. My mum at the start was not keen, but once she realised they were so well done, they had double glazing, they were really well heated. She loved it too. I loved that, living there, and it was a lot rougher than Australia, but you get on with it, you get in with it, and then it ended up in my teenage years when I got my first moped. I ended up meeting people from the Scotswood area, and that's where I used to go down, hang around there. And of course the Mary Bell case fascinated us. My parents read the book and I read the book. We all did, my sister too. And so what are your thoughts on Mary Bell? You know, the psychiatrists labelled her as with psychopathic tendencies. She herself says, in her own words, that she did have some problem when she was a child, but has that problem no more, and that she's totally fine now, and it seems to be proven she hasn't committed any further crimes. For all accounts, she's been a great mother and a grandmother, so of course that doesn't bring back the 2 boys whose lives she took, but I do think the judge handed down the right sentence, manslaughter and not murder. Without a doubt she killed the boys. I don't know. This is a difficult case. She was a very young child, had a terrible upbringing. That's no excuse, I know, but these are mitigating circumstances, and it's just very tragic for all concerned, really. I mean, okay, she has a life, but she's had to live with that fear of retaliation hanging over her shoulder, of being found out, and she was found out a few times, and it can't be such a great life. I'm not sticking up for her, I'm not defending her. Yes, of course, if she had been an adult, then it would have been clear-cut. It would have been murder, and she should never have came out of incarceration. It would have been a danger to society. But if she is fine now, and the psychiatrist determined at the time that she did have psychopathic tendencies, then that must mean that children can grow out of psychopathic tendencies. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that? Yeah, it's just as well, you know, that she was incarcerated, because I tell you, even at that age, because of what she did, she wouldn't have survived long in that area. Yeah, they would have got her for that. That's why she was frightened to actually come out. She feared for her life, and quite rightly so. There were a lot of angry people in that area after she did that, families and the friends of the family. So, yeah, tragic case. Anyway, I'm not defending it. I'm just looking at it from different angles, trying to get my head around it. It's a case that is sort of played on my mind all these years. How could a child do such evil? Yeah. And apparently recover and be a well-balanced human afterwards. Quite a strange case, my dear viewers. Anyway, this case was researched by the lovely Sarah. Thank you, Sarah, so much. Once again, brilliant work on that. And I hope you enjoyed the presentation, my viewers. I think maybe the next one I might do a change. Throw in a change there, and I might do maybe an old Hollywood story. Yeah. Maybe, just a bit of a change from vintage crime and horror. We'll do a nice old Hollywood mystery or drama. I think that might be a nice change. And I've got some interesting footage for YouTube coming up. A few weeks back, went to Geneva, went to a wonderful cemetery there, and a beautiful old abandoned house in Italy we visited with a friend. And of course the old junk store and a few other things coming up. So always stuff on the back burner, getting prepared to bring to you. So, and I think I've blah enough. I can't really think of anything else to say. Would love to hear your comments on this particular case. Do you think she should have stayed in prison for the rest of her life, or do you think she is deserving of this freedom? And she seems to have proved the parole board correct. She has lived a normal life. Again, it doesn't bring back the children. It's very tragic. I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Anyway, my friends, I'm going to head off now. Take care. Thank you all for your support, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.